Hello again everybody, and it's great to see all of us back again. And today we're going to look at two films which deal with disability. So the first one we're going to look at is Silver Linings Playbook, and let's just kind of have a recap of it if you look at the screen there, please.
In Silver Linings Playbook, Pat Solitano has just been released from a mental hospital. Pat suffers from bipolar disorder, but he is allowed to leave to live with his parents, Pat Sr. and Dolores. Soon afterwards, Pat meets Tiffany, a young widow with problems of her own, and they immediately connect. Pat Sr. is an obsessive Eagles fan and a compulsive gambler. He risks everything on a bet on the big game and on a ballroom dance competition in which Pat and Tiffany will take part. The pair must work together to impress the judges, and after weeks of practice they take to the dance floor, just about managing to score the 5 points they need. When the Eagles also win, Pat Sr.'s financial troubles are over. The couple finally realise their feelings for each other and find their silver lining.
Okay, so who wants to start the ball rolling? What did you think of it?
It was beautifully made.
Okay.
It's a great film. I loved the way they brought to everybody, to the audience, the issue of mental health.
I thought it was very interesting how they have, for once, they have a romance between two people suffering from mental health problems. Yeah. And I was especially refreshing that both of them were suffering because, well, we're suffering, I shouldn't really say that, but I just thought it showed a different side, and it also made it something different than your average romantic comedy. Yeah. And I think even looking at it from a demographic point of view, I think it appeals to men and women, this romance, as opposed to every other romantic comedy, which is pretty much geared towards one or the other. Yeah.
Also, what I liked about that film is it kind of move away from the narrative that somebody who's got an illness is going to meet somebody who doesn't have an illness, and that person is going to help him or her. But you can actually see that these two people, the men in the film actually got better through the female character in the film who've got a mental illness. So she made him strong. And she made him better from where he was, because I remember when he first left the hospital, he was clearly not well. But after he met her, he met Tiffany, she made him change all his ways. She actually made some steps bit by bit, even up to a point of writing that letter pretending to be Nikki, the wife. So that he continues to work on himself until get better. So I think to me it was a really good movie, because it actually highlights that two people who are in the same situation can actually help each other rather than the problem.
Do you think, Evans, do you think she set out to help him, or was she just interested in having a dance companion?
I'm not sure what I think from if I'm to think about it, because I didn't think about it, but if I'm to think about it, I think she wanted a companion herself. So she was trying to lure him in so that she get comfort from trying to fill the void of her dead husband. And eventually it came out to be something beautiful, and she realized it later that she needed him not for the reason that she wanted him for. So she continued doing that, but she had moved on from, initially she just wanted some kind of physical companionship, but she connected with him both emotionally and so she moved on from her original plan. And towards the end, you actually see that when he went to Nick, his wife, after the dance, she kind of felt upset and she left crying, because she felt she had molded somebody, she had connected with somebody emotionally. So she was going to have a future with him, and then all of a sudden he was going back to his wife. So That's what I can detect from that.
Which brings me again to something, did the cure come from within himself because he devoted himself to this new hobby, dancing, or from Tiffany? You know,
I think it was both to me.
Well,
he started taking his medication.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I think
this is it.
probably
Yeah.
a thing.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that's the thing with the bipolar. When you're well, you're really well, and you're full of vibrancy and ideas and enthusiasm, and you feel on top of the world. And that's when you make the decision, oh, I don't actually need my medication, which is a really bad idea, obviously. And that was part of it. I thought the start of it was very powerful in that this scene when they come home from hospital and he wakes up in the middle of the night and he's looking for his wedding video, and then the whole family starts screaming at each other. And I was sitting there looking at it. I nearly wanted to turn it off because it was actually head-wrecking. You know, you're kind of drawn in, and all the camera angles are very much of people's faces. They're very close-up, so you nearly feel like you're in that room with this. Can I say the whole family appear absolutely crazy? You know, he's the one with the supposed mental illness, but the father has a few mental issues of himself, and they wouldn't be diagnosed. And maybe it's a generational thing. But
OCD, you remember
he had OCD, and you know, you might have suspected a few anger management issues as well. Yet it was his son who supposedly had the problem. But you could see he wasn't alone. And then he had this friend who himself, I can't remember, he had this very successful lifestyle, and he said, I feel like sometimes just that I'm suffocating. And he clearly wasn't in a very, you know, good place either, yet again, he wasn't the one with the diagnosed mental illness. So I thought that was a clever way of showing that, okay, you can have one person with a mental illness, but you know what, there's a lot of it, you know, maybe on a lesser scale, a little touch of it in everybody. Yeah.
What about the mother? What do you think of her?
She was quite... I found her a bit vacant. She was sort of in the background a lot of the time. She obviously loved her son. I felt she was just overwhelmed, I think, a lot of the time.
But she was kind of proactive, really, in that she went to the hospital and picked him up when he was allowed to.
She covered him.
Yeah, and the father would never have done that. And she brought him, and then she wouldn't take the friend. Do you remember? So she was, So
maybe she was quietly strong.
that's what I felt, that you know, that maybe she was there in the background and just did the needful. You know, was it the brother? Hadn't he a brother, or am I making a
Yes, he
mistake?
had a
What
brother.
about the relationship with the brother? Did anybody comment on that?
He was like golden boy, wasn't
Yeah.
I think he was the golden boy, and also he was, you know, one of those people who doesn't take mental health issues seriously. He felt it was his fault that, because he actually narrated that he lost his house, he lost his wife, and he lost his job, but he got all these things. So he was actually kind of saying, it's your fault, you are not responsible, I'm the responsible one. So it kind of shows even in our world that sometimes family members don't take the mental health issues is something that is very serious. We kind of try to blame the person that is just an irresponsible person. That's why he's in the situation where he is.
Did you remember when they came home, the son and the mother, and the first thing he noticed was that his portrait had been taken down in the hallway? And do you remember it went up in the end? Would anybody comment on that? It was the significance of that. At the very end, the father was putting up the photograph. Do you
he? He
remember?
was ashamed of him, I suppose, at the start.
So has he come to terms with the situation?
I think hugely.
I think he did, and we kind of felt proud that he managed to turn around whatever his life, and especially because he made him win a bet or something. So I think from that, he kind of feel proud of him again.
We were talking about at different stages, maybe all of us have mental health issues at certain times in our lives, but it's, you know, and then if you like, you know, we deal with whatever it is, we heal and we move on, just like having the flu or having something else. And I don't mean that in terms of belittling it or that. At the same time, I am saying it in terms of normalising it. You know, you have a brain, you know, therefore you have mental issues, you have a body, therefore you have body physical issues. So it is, I think, a huge ignorance to say that none of us have ever, you know, have ever not been affected by mental health issues ourselves. It's possibly because, like we're talking about other societies earlier on, we don't speak about it and that we hide it, but I feel like we suffer in silence.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what actually
I was
happens.
reading an article recently, and it said that almost everyone is affected by mental health at one point in their life, whether it's through friends or children or parents or themselves.
Grief, death of somebody, lots of many different things, you know. Certainly at the moment, in terms of things like recession is another thing that can be, which affects relationships, which affects, lots of different family structures, all of these things.
Even depression as well. But I think for this mental illness, counselling is very important, because talking about the matter, because that eases half the mental pressure.
But some
and
people
medication.
some people think that counselling is the answer and medication isn't the answer. But I actually suffer from bipolar, and it took my family a good while to come around the fact that I'm on medication, and I could be on medication for the rest of my life, depending on how my illness goes. But there's a lot of people out there who think that medication is just a no, that you shouldn't take it, which is terrible, because it's for the last 25 years, it's kept me reasonably stable, and I'd hate to think what would have happened if it didn't,
But I think it's like all of these things when they talk about, even in terms of medical practices, the East versus the West, it's not an either-or situation, it's both and. And I think that while for some people I think it might depend on the severity of the mental illness that you have, that maybe it might be a case when you talk about counselling and that it isn't an either-or situation, but I think it could be the case that sometimes you might need, or one might need to be medically prescribed in order to stabilise oneself while one gets the counselling, and then it might be possible to come off the treatment, the medical treatment, depending on how long.
That's
how severe
actually
it is.
the silver lining I'm looking for.
And who's to say, we don't know how things are going to pan out, but for many people that is a possibility. I don't think it's an either or if one goes on medication, as you say, you don't know yet. You may be on it for life, and it's great that it's there, for you if you need that. On the other hand, you may not need it, depending on how things pan out for you or for anybody else who has
And also, when you're on medication, you don't stay stable the whole time.
No, you need to adjust the dose.
And when you're adjusting the dose or when you're changing medications, things can go wrong.
Yeah, you mentioned silver lining there, Joanne. What was the silver lining for Pat? Can anybody recall the relevance of the title?
He was looking for a silver lining throughout the film, and it wasn't just one thing. I don't think it was just one thing.
So, the silver lining was something that would kind of like the silver lining in the cloud. So even if the day is a dull day, there's something bright about it. Is that it, Joanne? Yeah. Do you remember at the very end when he danced and they kind of flopped? Do you remember that was kind of fun? Very realistic, yeah. It was really funny, wasn't it? Yeah, it was really, But the rest of it was very good, wasn't it, for two people who had just learned how to dance together? Do you remember the pleasure in the mother's face and the father's? And they were all standing, because here he had done something. And I think that was kind of the redemption, wasn't it?
They were proud of his achievement.
They were proud of the fact that he had danced, yeah. And I think he was proud himself, obviously. And
but it was really funny when they go into the hotel and they've been practicing and they're all right and they're getting better, and then you see these amazing professional dancers and you realise, oh God, they're not going to cut mustard at all, and you're all there looking at it, and it's so funny because they only want to get the 5, and the 5 is all, 5 out of 10 is all that's needed for the bet, and then when they get the 5, they're all jumping up and down, and you can see everyone else wondering, what's going on.
that was very funny.
It was wonderful that he had something to work towards. Pat did.
So do you think that's maybe one of the answers, Joanne, that if you have something that you're focused on outside yourself, oneself,
try and be as positive as possible,
I suppose, or even focusing on something takes. When I remember a doctor saying to me years ago, I was thinking I had a brain tumor, I had headaches, and he said, don't be thinking about yourself so often. Stop focusing on the fact that you might have a headache, and I did, and it disappeared in a day or two. That I was totally look outside yourself.
He says that himself, Pat, in the film, that he said, this is good for me, I want to do this thing, it's a discipline, it's making me get up in the morning, it's giving me something to go to, and obviously setting a goal and achieving a goal is a very motivating thing.
I think he found a silver lining.
He found the silver lining, and I think that's as good a way to end as any, Joanne. Thanks very much, everybody. So the next film we're going to talk about is Inside I'm Dancing, sorry. So we're going to look at a quick recap.
For Michael Connolly, life was something that happened to other people. Michael has cerebral palsy and is a resident of the Carrickmore Home for the Disabled. But Michael's world changes with the arrival of Rory, a wisecracking rebel who will not allow his muscular dystrophy to sap his spirit. Michael and Rory become firm friends, and Rory encourages Michael to get out into the world and into independent living. The lads recruit the lovely but unqualified Siobhan to act as their carer, and she helps them to experience life outside the home. When Michael falls in love with Siobhan, Siobhan, who cannot reciprocate his feelings, leaves, leaving Michael broken-hearted. Inside I'm Dancing is a film about living life and taking risks, with all of the joy and heartbreak that comes with it.
Okay, so from one very intense subject to another, we're now going to look at Inside I'm Dancing. And would anybody like to tell us what they thought about it?
Wonderful movie.
Yeah,
I'd seen it before and I loved it, and I was looking forward to watching it again.
yeah. So deals with what are the two conditions? Just to deals with muscular dystrophy and cerebral palsy, doesn't it? Yeah. So, any reaction to it, Dave?
To me, I think it's one of the best movies I've ever watched. And what I liked about that movie is that it's, although there is, at the ending you could see there's a kind of what you might think a tragic ending, but what I liked about it is that it's empowering. It showed a different side of people with disability, because sometimes, especially those with severe disability, we actually kind of have this mindset that they need to be in some kind of a nursing home. They can't do anything for themselves. But if you look at these two characters, they actually went and lived independently. And yes, there were struggles, just like in any other life people struggle, and just that the struggles are different. But you find that they are struggling, but they're happy, because they're making decisions for themselves. They're doing every day, bit by bit, for themselves. They're not being told, do this, do that every day. So it was empowering to them. That's what I liked about that.
So the reverse of that then was the institution at the very beginning. What did people think of that? Brenda Fricker, do you remember she was Eileen, was it? Eileen, and was that her name? Brenda Fricker,
I can't remember her name.
Type, and Ruth McKay.
They were very loving and they were very caring, but they were a little bit out of touch with their with the people staying in the institution. They treated them like babies when they didn't empower them or get them to do stuff for themselves. I think they were brushing their teeth and in some cases they needed that, but in other cases
Killing them with kindness.
Killing them with kindness.
That was difficult to write. So in roles, Rory. Wasn't that a breath of fresh air, wasn't it?
That's what I said. When I was watching it, I was thinking that.
I like this kind
in comes the rebel.
Yeah.
And of course, who does he click with immediately? There are two of them he clicks with. One of them is Michael, and I've forgotten the name of the other guy, but Michael's face brightens up.
Yes. And he's got a lot of sarcasm, and the funny sarcasm, and he brings a lot of comedy as well. And so.
And do you remember his language though in relation to Michael? He was pretty cruel, wasn't he?
Yes.
And would you remember his taunts?
Especially when Michael is falling in love with Siobhan, and he's in the other room and saying, I love her. And he just wants to put him down, but he puts him down in a very bad way. He says, have you looked at yourself in the mirror? Actually, he wants to tell him that, he wants to put him away from the love because he knows it's not going to work out. But he puts it in a very cruel way. When I heard it, it was very sad because he truly loved the girl.
He says, what have you got to offer that girl?
Yeah.
Did he really love her though? I wonder.
I think it was compassion.
Yeah. It's his first relationship, I would say. He thought he probably loved her.
He never met a girl.
Yeah, and never had that close contact with a young, beautiful woman. Yeah, but do you remember the very beginning when he comes in and the first thing he does is he starts talking about, Rory starts talking about the way Michael speaks, and he starts giving, that was awfully cruel, wasn't it? But I suppose it's his way of dealing with his situation.
Rory's the only person who can understand Michael as well.
Who's?
Rory,
and that was really...
That was wonderful.
That was a liberation
that broke
for
down
Michael.
some walls for Michael. Because
Yeah.
before, no one could understand him.
When they go to the club and Pat Short's the bouncer, while Michael is able to give him the reason why he's being discriminated against, and they act like it's going to put the club in trouble, basically. And how that's the kind of scene where you realise, the two of them work well together.
They complemented each
They
other.
need each other.
Do you remember when they were rolling up to the club and the camera was, I think it was probably at their angle in the wheelchair, and you roll up and you look at the two bouncers. Wasn't that very good? The imposing nature of the two bouncers, and in they go, and meeting the women. That was very funny as well, wasn't it? And then going back to the home. What about the place people like that have in society? Should obviously there's the institution, and the alternative is what? Could anybody?
Freedom, where they can live independently. I think they should be given a chance to live independently as well.
And how does that come about? How are we going to swing that one?
It is difficult because society itself is kind of, we feel like they are children. It's just like what we're saying in the survey, and the kids are right, that parents don't want to let go of their children. So society, when they're looking at disabled people, especially those who are kind of severe, who've got severe disability, we kind of want to put them somewhere where we will keep them like babies. We don't want them to get into any kind of trouble, so we have to be keeping an eye on them. And then if they say they want to go and live independently, we feel like they can't cope. So it's difficult for society to divorce itself from that, to say, let them go and experiment and see how they can manage it. It's really, really difficult.
So we infantilize them, but is it out of practical reason, or is it concern, or is it the money thing?
I'd say it's the money. I mean, if you think about if somebody needs around the clock assistance, because it's more assistance, that's what they had, a personal assistant. The cost of that for two people versus, you know, the home idea where you've got a number of people caring for, the ratio is much larger. You know, it's going to cost less. So that probably won't change unless there's more value placed on their needs as individuals to live a relatively independent life.
And so inside I'm Dancing, it's Rory, obviously. So what was he? How did you see the dancing?
Well, inside I'm Dancing, he's talking about how he's mentally, they're fine. There's nothing wrong with them in that sense. But when people see a disability and their perception of that, how they can't move physically, it just shows that they're moving in their head, and everything's normal to them, and they are normal people, and they are people that should be counted. But
That's
not
a really
everyone
nice
sees that.
description.
Yeah. And I've often wondered about, if you're an employer, do you have a responsibility to, and not to be tokenistic about it, Evans. I mean, you suggested that correctly earlier, you know. And, do you think you have a responsibility to employ, like I know SuperValue certainly seems to have a policy where I live anyway, of employing somebody with Down syndrome. You know, packing bags, or not at the checkout, but packing bags. Do you think that we should be pushing for that?
I think they should, because I think society should start accepting, because once society accepts, then even they are accepted in society.
Yeah.
Because otherwise that would be discrimination. So because even Michael, he has been so clever, even though he can't speak, he's got cerebral palsy. The way he's speaking to those three people,
yes,
like even Rory is shocked. Yeah. Like, you know, what is he saying? Because he gets through the housing, independent housing. Yeah. So he's shocked, like, because Rory he's a rebel, so he's rebelling, but still he couldn't get through. Yeah, they told him to wait for 6 months. So yes, there are a lot of intellectual people, even though they have disability. So they should be given a chance, like anybody else.
I was going to talk about the scene, you know, when the women were dancing and the two guys were looking. That was really very frustrating for them, wasn't it? Yeah. Do you remember the women were gyrating around, and Michael was. He wanted to get out of his body and dance, didn't he?
It was very good in the film at giving an insight into how frustrating it must be. And, you know, I don't think I'd survive. You know, and I was looking at the scene where Sinead fights with Rory, and she leaves the house and she said, I'm not going to put you to bed. And I was sitting there going, how's he going to get to bed?
Yeah, exactly.
And then she comes back and she puts him to bed. But you're thinking, like, he can't move until the morning, you know, to be so dependent on others for just your life. I don't think we probably appreciate that enough. It certainly gave me an appreciation of the fact that I can just move. And it was done in a very humorous way, so you didn't tune out after 5 minutes of the film. The film was a brilliant film, you know, that it happened to be about people with a disability, fine, but that's not what the film was about. In another way, it was about their personalities and achieving what they wanted.
And so there's something that I liked about them as well, is that they were really good friends. They were depending on each other, and they stood by each other. There are 2 or 3 clips that I saw, which was really fine. the first one, when they are outside the club and it's raining, Michael is doing whatever he was doing, and Rory waits for him. He didn't say, let me go and find somewhere where it's not raining. He waits for him, and they go together. And then the other part, which was really touching, is when Siobhan left and Michael is upset. He went trying to go and throw himself under the bridge, and he's complaining that we need to complain to the
That's right. That was that beautiful glass bridge. What it? Yeah, that's right.
I actually felt sorry for Siobhan in Inside I'm Dancing, because I think she felt like she was blamed for not being in love with Michael as well. So like, on one hand, she mentioned it to Rory, how he uses pity a lot, like how Rory doesn't want pity, but yet you use it to get what you want when it's convenient for you to do it. And obviously it wasn't convenient for her, so I think she tried it the best she could. Like, she even brought them to the party. She wanted them to integrate and to be normal, but like, at the end of the day, it wasn't going to work out from the start.
I know, it was inevitable in a way, wasn't it, that something was going to change as well. But you finished on a funny note. Do you remember when they went to the appeals board? They first of all, you had Rory and Michael, and he says, "This is my solicitor." Remember Rory? I thought it was very funny. And then, you know, the last time they go for the appeal, and Michael is in, and he says, "She's my solicitor." I thought that was really fun. And the three people, fair play to them, let them away with it. You know, so it was, So listen, thanks very much, everybody, for giving up your afternoon. Okay.